It is a well-known fact in my family and in the circles of my family that my mom at all times has a bottle of hand sanitizer in her purse. Anybody else have a bottle of hand sanitizer in their purse? How about their car? Anybody have hand sanitizer in their car? Nobody? Nobody? It's a known fact that at least one bottle of hand sanitizer at all times is in my mom's purse. And I'm pretty sure there are more than one in her purse at all times. But just in case you lose one, she loses one, or just in case someone takes it because they don't have one. I can't even know the countless amount she has in her car. My mom obsessively uses hand sanitizer. Well, and this was before some recent studies happened about the cleanliness of airplanes. I don't know if you know how dirty airplanes are, especially the seat belts and the tray tables. They're some of the dirtiest things on a plane. Not only that, but some of the studies continue to go into hotel rooms. And some of the dirtiest things in hotel rooms are remote controls, phones, and every single flat surface. Justin, wipe it down. So now, not only does my mom carry hand sanitizer, but now my dad carries hand sanitizer. And not only that, when we travel, they carry a little travel pouch of Lysol wipes. Have you seen those little travel Lysol wipes? And it is now that they obsessively wipe down every single surface on the plane that they can touch and in the hotel room. I can't even bring my suitcase into the room until we've wiped the whole room down. Almost like the cleaning service at the hotel is like not even clean the room. That's how we approach the room. And it was annoying at first. But then I realized how dirty everything was. And I realized that I really don't want to touch any of those things before I wipe them down. So now I am a carrier of hand sanitizer and Lysol wipes as I traveled. That hysteria has rubbed off on me. There are things all over that we don't want to touch. I know for a fact that I grab at least 5 paper towels before leaving the bathroom. And it's not because my hands are wet. It's because I don't want to touch the door handle on the way out of the bathroom. We do greeting time in church, and I know some of you, that's a little uncomfortable, shaking everybody's hands because you just don't know where those hands have been. And even in the doctor's offices, like, don't touch anything in there, because you'll get some kind of flu or some kind of cold or some kind of something, because sick people are in and out. Think of all the things that we touch during the day and during the week. And it really kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies. Like riding the subway in New York, like holding onto the rail. Like, how many thousands of people have held onto that same spot? Oh, that's why I carry one of these around with me. In our text for this evening, in John chapter 13, starting in verse 3, all this talk about hands, all this thinking about hands really drew something out for me in this text. That Jesus knew that everything was placed into his hands. Everything. All things, physical, spiritual, even time itself was given into the hands of Jesus. And not only that, he knew it. He knew he had everything in his hands. So much power in those hands. So much responsibility in those hands. So much strength in those hands. Divinity. Purity. Hold your hands out for a minute. And look at them. Have you ever thought about the hands of God? Like, look at your hands. Have you ever thought about the hands of God? The physicalness of them. And not a spiritual, lofty guy up there kind of floating around, but the physical hands of God. Not only that, But have you just thought the fact that God has hands? Have you thought that before? For me, this week, that was a mind-blowing thing. That we have a physical God who has hands. What does that mean for you and me? What does that mean for you? That you believe in a God who physically has hands. What do you think his hands are like? You think they're well manicured? Well lotioned, nice and soft like model's hands? What do you think his hands are like? Are they veiny? Are they wrinkly? What do you think his hands are like? As I've thought about the hands of God and what they may be like, I began to wonder and to think, where have those hands been? You know, we don't like to touch things where other hands have been. I wonder where God's hands have been. And I wonder what God's hands have done. And so I went to the Bible, because that's where you go to learn about God. And so think with me, just all the places that God's hands have been. In the beginning, God formed Adam with what? With dirt and with his hands. He got in the dirt and in the mud and formed man. And then he did divine surgery and went into Adam's side and pulled on a rib, and he formed woman because it was not good for man to be alone. Those hands of God then became tiny little hands, infant hands, that grasped the finger of Mary and maybe pulled her hair. Those hands, they dug in the dirt in the yard with friends or family. Those hands, they learned how to build things with his earthly father Joseph. Those hands that grasped the Scriptures, and proclaimed in the temple the prophecy that was written about him in Isaiah. Those hands that smeared mud on the eyes of a blind man and allowed him to see. Those hands that embraced lepers, healed the lame. And in John chapter 13, we read of those mighty hands, those healing hands, those all-creating hands that washed feet. Smelly, gross feet. Have you ever thought about the hands of God? And what he did with those, does, and has done with those hands? Those hands that not only held lepers, dirty, gross lepers, not only healed the blind with mud, held the grieving, and in John chapter 3, held and holds all things. Those hands washed feet. Now, I did have a really good idea, and I thought about it. I was going to have you all take your shoes off. But for everybody's sake, I'm going to say leave your shoes on. But think about your feet. Okay? Just think about them. Just think about your feet. Imagine them. Feet are gross. I mean, really. They smell. They look funny. They're gross. There's a reason why we cover them completely with socks and shoes. Feet are gross. And yet Jesus God made flesh with those divinely powerful hands, gets down on his knees and washes feet. Not only that, but men's feet. And men's feet are way worse than women's feet. And if you think of the time back then, these aren't just sweaty feet. These are dirty feet that wear sandals and walk around in the mud and where animals do their business. and where people spit. And I mean, these are feet that are covered. I mean, it's gross. Yeah, I want that face. Ugh. It's gross. Feet are gross. And God, with those hands, washed those feet. I have a question to ask you. What is this powerful act of humility and love that we see in Jesus in John chapter 13? What does that tell you about God? You don't have to answer it. You can think about it. What does this powerful act of humility and love tell you about the God that we worship? For me, it tells me that there is not a thing that God won't clean. Now, let me say that again. There is not, it's true. It is true that there is nothing that God isn't able to clean, but it's another thing to state that there is nothing that God won't clean. There's nothing that God won't clean, even smelly feet. And not only physical, but spiritual. We know that God has the power to forgive us, but do we truly believe that He will? Is there something that you won't let God clean? Because while you know He can, you don't think He will. Do you have the head knowledge that God can forgive and clean all things, but do you lack the trust that He actually will clean it? Feet are gross. Probably one of the grossest parts of our bodies. But stop thinking about your feet. And take a look at your own hands. Take a look at your hands. Where have your hands been? What have your hands done? Or even more convicting for me, what haven't they done? Like me? Have you ever been so concerned with getting dirty with the grossness of the life of somebody that you slowly back away or run for the hills because it's just too dirty? Their life is just too messy. I know that I find myself keeping people at arm's length who are just too dirty for me. Or even that figure of speech, I wouldn't even touch them with a stick because they're just too dirty. I look at my hands and I realize for me that I'm not only convicted about the things that these hands have done, but I'm also convicted about the things that these hands haven't done. And maybe for you, you can't get past the things that your hands have done, the things that you've done. And you can't even get to the point of thinking what they haven't done. Either way, no matter where you look at it, when you look at your hands, when I look at my hands, I realize that they're very frail and weak. And then in my attempts for comfort and joy, I grasp for things of the world to strengthen me, and I try to hold myself up under the weight that the world puts on me. For 9 years, I worked on a farm outside of St. Louis. It was a walnut farm. I was a walnut farmer for 9 years of my life. Started in 8th grade, and I stopped shortly before I joined the seminary. This farm was owned by a member of my dad's church. His name is Grant Glatt. His name is Grant Glatt. He's still alive. And he is one of the most humble, God-fearing people I know. And he wouldn't tell you, and he wouldn't confidently declare this, but he knew his Bible. He knew the Lord. He knew Jesus. And we get to talk about that on the farm and discuss questions that we both had and try to answer them together. And it was a joy to be able to work on that farm with my hands. I got to build a barn and work on tractors and drive tractors, and I learned a lot of things about being a man on that farm with Grant. I'm so thankful for that experience, and I'm so thankful for the conversations we've had. And I'll remember those for the rest of my life, but there's one thing that I won't ever forget about him, even when he is at rest with the Lord. And that's his handshake. Have you ever gotten a good handshake from somebody? Not the limp fish handshake or the I'm going to squeeze your life out handshake. But there was something about his handshake that I will never forget. Because when I would shake his hand before he'd give me a big old hug, you'd feel the years of work on his hands. They weren't smooth. They weren't well manicured. They were calloused and wrinkly, and I'm pretty sure he had a cut almost every time I saw him, or a Band-Aid covering it up. And I don't think his nails were dirty because of lack of trying to clean them. I think it was just the years and decades of farming in the dirt and in the grease and in the oil of tractors. That's just a permanent stain on his hand. But while there was a lot of strength and grit there, there's also a lot of comfort in that handshake. That you knew that he loved you just by shaking your hand. While it was tough, it was also gentle. And while it was raw and it was beat up, it was very pure. I don't know if you've ever shaken the hand of a working man, somebody who's worked with their hands their whole life. When I think of Grant and his hands, it reminds me of God's hands. Because they're not well lotioned. They're not well manicured. They're not high and mighty, but they're hardworking, strong, and yet gentle and comforting. And all things are placed into those hands. These hands that washed feet, those hands that showed us how to love, showed us how to care, those hands that showed us how to serve, those hands that did things. God's hands. Hands that in just a few hours later would be bound. Hands that would grasp the dirt as he tried to regain strength and balance from carrying the load of a cross on his back. Hands that would be stretched out wide and pierced by long metal nails. Hands from which blood would flow, life-giving blood. Hands that would hang lifeless from a dirty, bloody cross. Those hands. Hands that came not to be served, but to serve. Hands that came not to be loved, but to love. In those hands, all things were given. You ever thought about God's hands? Have you thought about where those hands have been, and have you ever thought about what those hands have done? Hands that 3 days later would regain life once again. Hands that would once again embrace his mother and his grieving disciples. Hands that would be touched by Thomas, who just needed a little proof. Yet on this night, the night he was betrayed, the night before his bloody and cruel passion, this night, he washed his disciples' feet because he loved them. Those hands took bread and broke it. And he blessed it and he passed it to his disciples. He took a cup and he gave it to them to drink. On this night, with those hands, he gave us all things. He gave to us a gift of His everlasting presence until He comes again. My parents will always have hand sanitizer on them. It is a fact. And I'm pretty sure they always have Lysol wipes on them, whether they're traveling or not. And we will always wipe down planes. And if we could, I'm sure my mom would wipe down the entire plane. And we'll always wipe down hotel rooms. There are gross things in this world. And while we may be afraid to touch those things, or go near those things or people, or maybe even you feel like your life is one of those messy, dirty things, there is not a thing that Jesus won't clean. Even better, there is not a thing that Jesus hasn't cleaned already. It's in those nail-pierced, calloused, working, strong and yet gentle hands that all things are placed. And you are one of those things. By faith and in His grace, Jesus holds on to you. Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and my Father are one." You are in His grip. Amen.